What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with another 2023-2024 NBA team look ahead. We are on to the Dallas Mavericks, and that means we are excited to speak with Kirk Henderson. Follow him on Twitter at Kirk Serious Space. That's with a K, and the rest is spelled exactly as it sounds. He does stuff at Mavs Moneyball, and he is also the host, right? Co-host of it's not on your bio, but I've listened to you on it, Pod Mavericks on the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Kirk, how are you doing?
Okay. We're apparently close to basketball season. I have had a long time off, so it's been weird to be like, oh, hey, we need to start doing Mavs stuff again.
It's always sort of I started them a little early this year to try to not be out of my mind by the time we're getting to open tonight with the Lookaheads. But whenever I start this series, I'm like, oh, the NBA offseason is just, it's over, like, for me. And I'm not going to lie, as I've gotten older, I've grown to, like, very much appreciate the offseason. I'm so saturated with basketball content, like 10 and a half months out of the year, that those, like, 6 weeks or so go by way too quick for me.
That's right. Just catching up on stuff, enjoying not doing things until the dead of night. And it is nice. But I think once I see some games, and I really did enjoy the World Cup, but that was at like 6 a.m. So that was like a very different basketball experience. Once the night games flare up again, I think I'll enjoy getting back into the rhythm again. It's somehow year 10 or 11 for me at Mavs Moneyball. So
oh wow, I am at year. I have to do math. Carry the 6. No, I'm year 12 at Bleacher Report, I think. So, we're getting old.
I would say it goes by quickly, but that's not really true. It's just, certain things where it's like, wow, it was that long ago. Like my co-host and I last night started talking about Josh Howard's rookie season, which just happened to be like, God, that was 20 years ago. What the world?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. That's like, I have those reminders every so often, like seeing kind of like LeBron and Steph and KD get older is this sobering reminder. Like, dude, you're getting up there. I'm with you though, that I get excited for the season, but I don't know if you get like, I know you're following the cover of the Mavs, but that like first couple nights where there's like the 12 or 13 games, like I have like this existential dread. I just get so anxious. Like how did I do this all these other years?
Yep. It's great.
So the Mavericks, let's start with Kyrie Irving here. Before we get to just the contract or whatever, well, how did you feel about the contract they ended up giving him? You knew they were going to re-sign him. I think a lot of people were just like, why are you getting in the Kyrie Irving business? They were already in the Kyrie Irving business. Like, relative to that, what did you think of the contract terms that they came to?
I was not particularly thrilled, but then just because I sort of took the Bill Simmons tack of like, who else is giving him that money? But, as I've sat with it for most of the summer, I tend to agree with, I've sort of moved a little bit in the sense of, I think you have to pace. You want him to feel respected. Kyrie Irving is a particularly difficult person to talk about in all sorts of ways, but you want him, you don't want to give him any reasons to not show up to work. And a 3-year deal, no one else is giving him a 3-year deal, $40 million. No one else is giving him $40 million. But what the Mavericks weren't going to do anything else with the money because they didn't, they were the only team, they could go over the cap to keep him. And it sort of worked. And, the player option of it all is very interesting to me. Kyrie Irving is not, he's a small, slight guy. That's one thing that I don't think is really translated on TV because he's obviously like wondrously athletic and so gifted, but he's like 175 pounds. It's like small guards like that. Just it's tough. So it's like his game will probably age well because it's so beautiful. But at the same time, it's a 33-year-old Kyrie Irving might struggle to stay on the floor just because, I mean, Lord, I'm approaching 40 and it's sometimes hard for me to get out of bed in the morning. So it's as you get older, it's just tough to do this sort of stuff. And I don't know. I think it probably works out for the best. He'll feel respected. I think the Mavericks are taking this 1 year at a time. They get one good year out of Kyrie Irving. And I think that is pretty important to what, for the starting point of what they're trying to rebuild here.
When I saw the terms of the deal, sub-max money, they didn't go out 4 years. The player option, like you said, is interesting. I just thought you were going to keep him. I thought it worked. I thought it worked out as well as it could be expected for the Mavs, given how invested they were in this. What did you actually think, though, of the on-court fit, both during the Luka and non-Luka minutes? Because I do think a lot of what happened with the Mavs towards the end of last season, aside from them deciding to punt on the playoffs, it was just attributed to the Kyrie Irving trade. They were having issues beforehand. They were winning the minutes those two were on the court. And I'm not like, I wonder if Kyrie Irving's going to show up to work. You kind of mentioned that before. Like, I am one of those people, but I just don't know. I didn't see anything that I thought made the fit terrible or that anything went wrong with the Mavericks needed to be ascribed to him.
I thought it was absolutely electric when Kyrie and Luka played together. One of the things that I could tell from just kind of the national pundits was whether or not, when you start, Kyrie and Luka can't play together. No, they can play together just fine. They had a lot of fun. Their minutes were fantastic, and they kind of ruled. If you were watching a lot of the games, I mean, they played Philadelphia where each of them scored 40, and it was incredible. The problem came with the fact that they gave up just the kind of pieces that were keeping everything together by, kind of with like sticks and glue. And when you trade, the connective tissue of the team and like a Dorian Finney-Smith, that means everything else sort of falls apart because they were playing brutal lineups last year. They were already small before they traded all the pieces to get Kyrie, and then they ended up just tiny. Luka was often the best rebounder. That's some of that's by design, but it ends up eating things up. And so it's just the non-Luka minute, or like everything with those two were fine. Even Kyrie, leading the team, which he did. I think he played the first 3 games without Luka. They were like 3-0.
Yeah.
He was great. It's just the Mavericks as a team were so is bleak because in March and April of 2019, they had particular lineups which featured like Jalen Brunson, Tim Hardaway, Maxi Kleber, Dwight Powell, Luka Doncic, and at least one other guy. It was like 6 or 7 people, and then Dorian Finney-Smith. And then as of February 2023, those players were all still on the team and in the lineup. So they just rolled out the same group over and over and over again. And they just needed to do something different because there were diminishing returns on a lot of that stuff. And so to get Kyrie Irving, I was not particularly thrilled just because when you have Kyrie on your team, you just got to take it a season at a time. You're not I think assuming that you're building around Kyrie is messy. It just because it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked since he left, since the championship in Cleveland. He's barely gone a year where he's been particular. It's anything past a year seems to be, particularly challenging. It's not something I think you can do. But I enjoyed the fit. I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do now that they have a whole host of new pieces. And at the very least, it's going to be interesting. The Mavericks of last year were not interesting. They were mediocre to bad and boring. And that's not fun to watch.
No. And I think really I think I used to be like this where I was worried about the one ball stuff years ago. And then just ever since probably like LeBron and Kyrie around that time, I've just been like, they're going to figure it out. Like James Harden, Chris Paul figured it out. Look what Brooklyn was when they were actually available. Right. And like you said, the offense was electric. The defense was the concern in large part because it wasn't great to begin with. You traded away Dorian Finney-Smith. You already mentioned that. I think they were around the bottom 5 in points allowed per possession once Kyrie made his debut. There was availability issues, and sure, they clearly knew that was a weakness. They go after Matisse Thybulle. They end up with, you had Dante Exum, but they end up with Grant Williams. I'm curious how you feel about the Grant Williams fit, especially given how it was framed, because you give up the 20-30 swap, and then a lot of people are talking about like, yeah, this is someone who's really going to anchor. I saw him like called a wing a bunch of times. I'm like, he's very switchable, but he's not a wing. Like those were not the assignments that he was just taking last year. And so I'm just like, what are the expectations for him? One, and then, divorcing those, or I guess attaching them to reality, I should say. Like, how do you feel about the overall fit of Grant Williams in Dallas?
Well, you're right. It's funny. There was a particular Mavs podcaster who I know last night. Grant Williams was at the Wings game, and he took a picture with Tim Hardaway. And the guy was like, what? Grant Williams is shorter than Tim Hardaway? And it's like, yeah. He's like a 6'5" power forward. He's PJ Tucker at Texas with a little more youth in his legs. And He's very interesting on passing. He's a weird player. He's a weird player that I think fits in weird ways and gives this team a lot of optionality. He is not going to fix their problems, but the other part of that is their problems on the wing were so bad that even if he's not a good solution, he's still better than what they were rolling out there. So I think like this assumption that he's going to be any sort of stopper is pretty silly. I do think that he allows their defense to be very multiple depending on who else he's out there with. Like if Maxi Kleba can stay any approximation of healthy for part of the year, I think him and Grant Williams will have a lot of fun with like their switchability.
Oh yeah.
And things like that. So you ask if here in the sheet you said is he also like a lock to start? I think so, but I also think what Jason Kidd has now in this lineup is a bunch of weird guys where it's like Luka's going to play point at 6'8". Kyrie will play shooting guard at 6'2". They'll probably throw out somebody like Tim Hardaway to start the year at 3, but I think Olivier Maxence-Prosper, their second first-round draft pick, will probably end up starting at some point just because he just screams Jason Kidd to me. I mean, he is he's just like he's a big guy. Like number one, the guy is enormous. Like he is Paul George sized. Like I can't. And after having a bunch of undersized wings like Josh Green for years, I'm looking for it. So it's like that guy at like 6'8" will probably play the 3 and maybe a little bit of 4. And it's just like, remember, you're not asking a lot of these guys to do a lot of playmaking because Kyrie and Luka are going to be doing most of the dribbling. So it's like, can you move? Can you cut? Can you post? Do you know where you're supposed to be? Can you play defense? And I think so that sort of variability that Grant Williams will give teams, I think he'll start. But if he doesn't always start, I think that's fine too.
Do you think it sort of suggests that they are going to switch a lot more, or at least make it a crutch because you have him? I think we've seen, look, Kyrie switched in Boston years ago, I believe, a bunch, and Luka has size. You mentioned Maxi Kleba. There's still Dwight Powell here. So is that like, does that intimate? And they don't have like a true blue rim protector on this team, I guess, unless you expect that to be Derrick Lively or Richaun
I do,
Holmes.
but not until like game 50. So It's like to start the year, I do think they go with a really switch heavy effort based scheme. I mean, I don't think Kidd can coach a lick, honestly, but one thing he did do was get him to play really hard in 2021, 22. So I do think that they can do that again and at least seal some games that way. I mean, really, it comes down to like Kyrie gave great effort on defense last year. They need to get Luka to give consistently great effort because he's going to get targeted a lot, but he's huge. So it's like if you at least like use what you got. And so I think like on paper, at least the idea makes sense with sort of a switch heavy scheme and really effort based. I'm at least intrigued with what they're going to try to do defensively.
It does seem that just based on how the roster is set up, regardless of what defensive scheme you're going to run, and we saw this to an extent last year, that there's a ton of pressure on Josh Green defensively, in addition to what we saw from him offensively, like progression last year. So how do you feel about, like, is he up to that sort of task to be, their top wing defender? And then
Truly
also
bizarre basketball player. Truly bizarre basketball player. You look at his numbers, they just don't make sense. He averages 9 points a game while shooting 40% from 3. And then you go look at his box score and he'll have 6 games in a row where he has 0 points. And then he'll have 4 games in a row where he scores over 20. And I know you asked about his defense, but I think he's a weird player that I don't know how to talk about. I don't think he's a good defender. He's small. He's a 6'4". He's not 6'5", 200. He's a stocky guy, but he's small. You see that whenever you pair him up against any true, kind of A caliber wing in the NBA. He's a 6'4" shooting guard is what he is. And to me, he's up for a contract extension. I think they get that done. Just like kind of block him in.
Do?
Yeah, I do. Because like, what are you going to, let him play it out and go get $20 million a year somewhere? Why not pay him, about the same as the Lakers just paid? What's his name? Yeah. So something like that, where it's like a $455 million a year, something like that. I mean, even if it's more, it doesn't matter.
If I
it'd be fine. And it's like, then if he doesn't work out, you move him down the road. He's a guy. And considering where he was during Rick Carlisle's during his rookie year, I thought he was going to be out of the league. So him being functional is impressive, but I don't think they can really count on him. I really don't. I keep going back to the rookie Omax. I really think that guy's going to just play 20 to 25 minutes a game by season's end. Maybe not like averaging for the whole year, but I think he'll be a key part of their rotation.
Really quickly on Josh Green, so like you just don't buy into like the stability. Like he did get like his driving game improved a bunch last year. Like that's just not, you don't count on him as a stable offensive piece.
I don't, because it's he doesn't have the scorer mindset.
Okay.
And so I think that can harm it. Like when he was out there with either Luka or Kyrie, he was pretty good. When he was out there with both of them, he was remarkably meh. He's kind of a weird X factor player. He does odd things with the basketball that players don't anticipate. And so that can work both for and against him. But if he's out there and he's not getting the ball a ton, I don't really think he's that effective. He's not a good, he's a good stand and like catch and shoot guy, but he's not a guy who will naturally take like 6 open threes a game. He does like the auto rotate thing where you can see he's going to make the pass even before he gets it. Does that make any sense?
No, I get that. Yeah.
It's just, it's not really, he's improved so much, but I have concerns about what his top level ought to be. That's not to say I don't think they should pay him. I just said they should, but yeah. I don't know what I don't see this. Like, it's not like he's some burgeoning hidden superstar. He's a guy. He'll play 10 years in the league and be fine.
He's first team. All people want you to know they watch a lot of basketball though when they talk about him. Though. At least he makes that team. Like, you mentioned Omax twice. I didn't have him on the outline until lower, so we have to talk about him. You mentioned he's a Jason Kidd player. I think he shot, I saw, was like 41.8% on NBA range threes last year too. So is that like part of the appeal? It's like you just want to surround Kyrie and Luka with a bunch of 3-and-D guys. And right now, I guess the only 3-and-D guy on this roster would be Grant Williams. Like, do you consider like throwing Josh Green in that conversation like a little bit? So
a little bit.
The appeal of Omax?
That is the appeal. And there's also, so I've gone to Summer League every year for 10 years. I have watched some horrific Dallas
That's a lot
Mavericks.
of Vegas, by the way.
Well, and just the Mavericks have not ever been good. They were good in Summer League. The year that they had Jalen Brunson, Luka couldn't play. Brunson was so bad at Summer League, I thought he was a bust. Like, that was kind of the root of my Brunson disbelief. He was awful at Summer League. And I watched so much bad basketball. The good parts stand out in my mind, so perhaps I'm overrating him. But during Summer League, I saw a guy that was much bigger than I realized, much stronger than I realized, and had a willingness to do stuff with the basketball. And so when I see a guy, lots of like, he moved off ball real well, attacked well. He gave the guy who the Pacers drafted at 8, what's his name? Shoot.
Jarris Walker.
He gave Jarris Walker the business. I mean, absolutely took his lunch money in a game. And I'm probably overrating that sort of stuff, but I just haven't seen it from a Mavericks player before. Okay. And so I think that he's going to be a guy and I sort of compared him to Josh Green last night, Josh Howard, 2003 Dallas Mavericks draft pick, who came into a very good team and not that the Mavericks are a good team now, but as a rookie earned his minutes in like a garbage man way, getting offensive rebounds, like playing hard defense. And like with a team with Luka and Kyrie, that's all you need. You just need a guy willing to do that stuff. And so you throw all those and everything else. And I find myself unreasonably excited about him. Plus the fact that the Celtics lost their minds on draft night when the Mavericks snuck up and took him, because they traded back 3 times after the Mavericks took him. That's how flustered they were by that pick. Seriously.
Maybe this will be another Desmond Bane situation all over again. Different, obviously, because that was the actual Celtics pick. But and look, the threes he's gonna get from Luka and Kyrie are just like, they're gonna tee him up. And so I think that's a reason to buy into his shooting. And I think to an extent that can streamline your offensive development, where it's, hey, we need you to do X, Y, and Z on defense, but you're just gonna fan out and dot the arc on offense. And like these guys are gonna tee you right up. So I'm officially, after listening to you, way more excited to watch Omax than I was coming into this podcast.
You'll see him, and I think you'll understand what I mean, where it's just like NBA players, and this doesn't come across in TV. A lot of NBA players are very thin. And to the point where it's like, wow, these guys like Dirk Nowitzki and Tyson Chandler were so dang skinny. I mean, I weigh 240 pounds. I'm 6'3". Dirk's 7 foot. He weighed 240 pounds. It's like, there's just a different body type. So when I see a guy, that's why like LeBron just stands out. Why, Zion Williamson obviously just stands out. Omax has shoulders that look like a linebacker. And I'm addicted to those kind of like tough dude traits. I could be completely off base, but I find myself excited.
they did a lot of other stuff over the
Mm.
offseason, and we generally, I will say the only thing I was uncomfortable with about their offseason was just that 2030 swap, just the idea that you've kind of given up
Yeah.
control of like those two back end picks in 29 and 30. I really liked their offseason overall. Of the other moves that they made, like, was there anything that stood out that you really liked, that you were concerned about? What were just your general impressions of their offseason looking at it in sum?
Oh man. So the fact that so for everyone who may have forgotten, they they were just awful from March 1st on. That can't really be properly. You need to go look at like their game log. They were awful. So the notion that as a 10 seed that they could have somehow made the finals like Miami or the Lakers nearly did was insane to me, because I don't think they won 2 games in a row for a month. So they slid in and they tanked. They did tank. Let's make that clear. But they would have been lit up had they been in the playoffs. So everyone's killing them, understandably, for tanking, which why the Mavericks got killed. But everything. Damian Lillard, tanking for the 4th year in a row is somehow noble. I don't understand it. They turned that 10th pick that they ended up with into they moved off of the last Blazers contract, Bertans, which was a horrendous contract.
Yeah, that was bad.
They picked Derrick Lively, who I was a little on, but I've grown to be interested in. Then they traded into the first round and got Holmes, Richaun Holmes from the Kings into the trade exception they created for moving on from Lavi and Laser, and then took Maxence-Prosper. So they added a big guy to the rotation who's basically been sitting on ice for over a year. No good.
I think he could still play, by the way.
I have no idea how good he is, but he's such a weird player. He has a push shot from like the YMCA from the 50s
he's shooting like 60. By the way, he's shooting like 65+% on those the past 3 years.
I can't wait to see Luka. I can't wait to see him and Luka operate in a pick and roll, because it's going to be from such a different space than Luka's operated with other guys. So that part's going to be fun. Obviously ended up with Grant.
I saw someone, I thought it was a bonkers take, said that Luka's never had like a lob threat before, and
He's only had Dwight Powell. Yeah. Is the thing.
And I think Richaun Holmes gives you sort of like a multi-level, like a 2-level pick and roll threat, because he has that push shot and he can also be that threat at the actual rim. And so that's why I'm very intrigued by his fit on this roster.
And he might be terrible at defense too, but I mean, anything to make their offense a little more variable could be fun. They also signed in what could be a very interesting deal, Dante Exum, to a 1-year deal, but I think they have his bird rights. They could always re-sign him. And Exum played astonishingly well overseas the last year. He has apparently developed a shot, which I didn't, is bizarre. After tearing his ACL, he was out of the league. He looks more like a small forward to me, because he's like 6'5" and 220 pounds.
Especially on this team, he looks like a small forward.
Right. So it's just it's interesting. So it's like those were kind of the highlights. None of them really, all of them together, I really liked, because they were trying to build something different within the team structure. And so, will it work? I don't know. But like I said, from 2019 to 2023, they had 5 or 6 players that were the same in the rotation, and that's just not going to be the case this year.
So when you're kind of looking at these, like, I'll call them back end of the offseason guys, I'm so intrigued by how the secondary, like, perimeter rotation shakes out. And so who like plays a bigger role on this team when it comes down to Jaden, Hardy, Seth Curry, Dante Exum, like that trio?
That's an interesting one. A lot of the scuttlebutt I've heard just from talking to people is that when you look at sort of the minute distribution, Hardy might, a lot of people expected Hardy to take a second-year growth, like, step in the right direction. I don't see where the minutes are coming from, because prior to the offseason, the Mavericks' best 4 players were all guards. You have Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Josh Green, Jaden Hardy. Hardy, I think, is a particularly talented scorer. He has the body to where I think he could become a pretty good defender if he wanted to be. Not very good on offensive playmaking, kind of shockingly bad. At least it's
his handle is like very loosey goosey.
It's like for a guy who's a point guard, and like he doesn't really have a lot of functioning point guard skills. But that's okay. You don't need him on this team. I think Seth Curry is a break in case of emergency type guy. They got him for a steal of a deal. I also think the Mavericks would have tried and will continue to try to trade Tim Hardaway Jr., because he and Seth Curry's skills kind of overlap. You want a guy willing to take the shots that Luka gets you. But Seth Curry also has a history of kind of maddening injury issues. So it's, I'm counting on 45 games of Seth Curry. Exum's kind of the X factor for me, to where if he makes a difference, he gives Kid another look. And so that's the guy I'm kind of most interested in all of this.
Is there room or runway, however you want to frame it, for Jaden Hardy to actually, it's not even just crack the rotation, but progress on this team? I guess if you were trying to identify like who's going to be the third ball handler off the bench, he would be the best candidate. But you also have Luka and Kyrie, and it's like, so what kind of opportunity is going to be there for him to develop?
There's really not. It's something that's sort of in the back of everyone's head when you're really looking at the meat and potatoes of how Dallas will function. But then the flip side is, over an 82-game year, you have two superstars, one an older one who will need, Kyrie just gets nickel and dimed. I know that there's all these star resting rules, but I don't think you're going to have to rest Kyrie. I think he's going to get hurt. Luka does too. And so I think there'll be plenty of opportunities for these guys. What my biggest beef with the Mavericks team building has been over the last two is that they don't anticipate or haven't anticipated the fact that Luka's going to miss 10 games because he plays 3 yards in a cloud of dust basketball where he just gets banged up. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, there's multiple options built into this roster to where I don't think they'll miss a beat, but they're prepared to deal with injuries and rest and guys out in a way that they haven't been, at least last year in particular.
You had mentioned that you're a little bit more intrigued by Derrick Lively now. What has swayed you there? And is it feels like there are 3 locks in the big man rotation when you look at Powell, Kleba, and Grant Williams. What type of opportunity will be there for him? Or is it going to be more Derrick Jones Jr. and Richaun Holmes in those minutes? Just what do you kind of see there?
I think they have to throw Lively out there. Otherwise, it's a waste of a draft pick. I think you have to see what he gives you. He started the year off on Duke's bench, and then by the end of the year, he was arguably one of the best 10 defensive players in college basketball last year. What intrigues me about him, and if you'll allow me a minute to kind of ramble.
I'll allow you 12 minutes if you need.
I've been very interested in American bigs since about midway through FIBA, when it became clear that Jaren Jackson Jr. was never taught how to rebound. And comparing it to the Euro counterparts where these guys are just getting waxed because the European basketball players have skill sets that American basketball players don't. And then to jump in a weird direction, I've this picture of LeBron James, the EBYL basketball tournament, has stuck in my head where he was surrounded by 17-year-olds that were bigger than he was. And I think to myself, where in the hell are all of these bigs going? Some of them, it makes sense. You got Karl Towns, you got Ayton. They're not American citizens. They go and play for their other countries. There aren't, but when it comes to American bigs in basketball, I think younger players get really, if you're not a heliocentric guy, you get pushed out. You are told to go be the garbage man. You are told to rebound and pass to the guy. That sucks. So, I think that there's a dearth of American big men because it's like the roles that we allow these guys to play, they don't really want to play them. Enter Derrick Lively, who has joined this team and basically said, I want to box out, rebound, roll to the basket, and dunk. I can do more, but that's how I'm going to help this team win. And it was just so shocking to hear that. It's obviously PR speak. He's been told to say this stuff. He knows that's where his money's going to be made. But I've watched Willie Cauley-Stein, JaVale McGee, some really true horror show centers, the guys that think they're super skilled and awesome and have more to show to the game. DeAndre Jordan, Eddie Curry, just some real rough players the last 10 years of my Mavericks fandom. And so to hear a guy basically like, I want to do what Tyson Chandler did, is so delightful to me. And I think the only way you learn how to play basketball is, and this is a wild concept, is by playing basketball.
Wow. Hold on, hot take.
NBA teams don't practice, so I think you got to throw the guy out there and play him 15 minutes a game, even if he fouls out, because he has a real fouling problem. That's okay.
Do you know who he sort of reminds me of? And I want to make it clear, I was incredibly low on this player coming into last year. And I'm just talking about not necessarily with their physical attributes necessarily, but I was low on this player last year. He ended up being spectacular. Just how he plays within himself or wants to play within this specific role. I could see like a Walker Kessler type of turn for him. There's definitely more I think explosion there. And I don't think the opportunity that Kessler eventually got in Utah will be there in year one. But I could kind of see that level of defense from him. Like
his
wingspan
right is enormous. One of the things I did like about him in Summer League is that he didn't do the big man things that left his teammates hanging out to dry. JaVale McGee is one of the most frustrating basketball players I've ever seen in my entire life because he's so athletically gifted, but he commits to doing the wrong thing with such like tenacity. And if he just, it's like, don't get out of position. Just put your big hands up in the air, stand there, box out, go get the rebound. And that's the sort of stuff that Lively was doing where it's during Summer League. Yeah, the Mavericks got scored on. Yeah, they made a lot of mistakes, but it was never, this happened because he chased a block and ended up being 4 feet out of the lane. So an offensive rebound happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that.
So it's like the minimization of mistakes, I think, will benefit him under a guy like Kidd, who is a bit intense.
Could he, though, get lost in the shuffle of just like having Richaun Holmes there? And I think some people still view Derrick Jones Jr. as a wing. He's a big. And so like you have him.
No, he's a 6'6" big.
Yeah. Could he get lost? Like, could Lively get lost in that shuffle just by virtue of being a rookie?
Yes. But if he does do that, they will send him down to their G League affiliate where he will get minutes. And that played very well for Jaden Hardy. And obviously they're two very different positions, but Hardy had kind of a 20, if you break his season down into 20 game stretches, every 20 games, he was doing something a little bit different and a little bit better. And I mentioned earlier in the podcast, by game 50, I expect something from Lively. And that's sort of where I am right now. I would love for them to play him more, but the more I think about it, the more I realize it's probably not realistic.
Maybe if there's like trades that they make mid-season that would open up extra playing time, who knows? We mentioned the defense already. Is there any just sort of low-hanging fruit this team is built to improve upon or can feasibly improve upon when you're looking at just maybe lineups with better rebounding aside from Luka being your best rebounder, just fouling less, anything like that could help them? Because I think you look at the talent, it's like, no, they're not going to, what were they, 6th in 21, 22 in points allowed per possession or whatever? Even if they hustle their asses off, I would be shocked if they could replicate something like that.
Yep,
is there any low-hanging fruit that you think that they can clean up that would make a big difference?
Honestly, no. I think one thing that will help, though, and I don't see this as a realistic thing, but it's a guy can dream. Jason Kidd has to realize when lineups don't work. He stuck to the McGee of it all for 10 games, and they lost more games than they should have to start the season, in no small part because of his commitment to McGee. I get that they have a lot of new options, but basketball, it's like Greg Popovich talked about this during his Hall of Fame speech. He's like, there's nothing new under the sun here. You don't need, 200 minutes to figure out that a lineup that, where Luka Doncic is your tallest player is not great for defense. Like that sort of stuff. So we'll see.
This is, it's such a lazy question, but I think it matters. The Mavs are in this weird spot where they haven't pushed in all their chips. Like there are moves in the trade market they could make, but you've also made some pretty high stakes moves. Even just looking at the Kyrie Irving acquisition, I would say Grant Williams as well. Is this a team that, we're 15 or 20 games into the season, we could see some existential fireworks where it's, Jason Kidd is on the hot seat if they don't start off well? Or are they more likely to then just sort of re-seek out reinforcements on the trade market than looking at the coaching aspect?
That should be the case. And if this were any other NBA team, two things work against this. The first is that Mark Cuban made the hire. Mark Cuban made the hire at Rick Carlisle's behest. I think Rick sort of thought it was a joke. I don't know that for certain, but it's like you rarely let the guy you're firing pick the coach you're hiring next.
Right.
Mark Cuban is a stubborn man. That is thing number one. So even though Jason Kidd has every single team he's coached, he only has, two other teams. They don't perform well the longer he's there. That's just a historical fact to this point. The other challenge with moving on from Jason Kidd is I think he has Kyrie Irving's buy-in. And that can't be undersold as to the importance there. It's Kyrie Irving, and mercurial as he is, he has talked about how Jason Kidd was one of his favorite players growing up, and that matters. And keeping Kyrie locked in, can't really put a price on that. Well, you can put a price on that based off of some of the things he's done for other teams. So it's just that's just sort of where I fall. I think that they have a pretty good likelihood of starting out the season rough because they're doing an overseas trip in preseason, and that's just kind of a historical thing. There's been a few outlier teams, but it's difficult to get. And then they have a youngish team. But I think they just sort of stick with it. They have one more trade chip that they could really push in if they wanted to in their 2027 draft pick. I don't think that moves the needle on anything. I think them and the Hawks are engaged in a low stakes staring contest over whether the Hawks want to give up Clint Capella. And I think that would mean taking back Tim Hardaway, but I don't think they want to do it. And the Mavericks certainly aren't going to give up a first round pick to give up, potentially overripe banana and Clint Capella. There's always some things there. I will say the Nico Harrison has proven, and they've hired some salary cap guys from the Knicks. The front office has been reshaped into a place where Cuban still has a voice, but he is not the voice. And I think that's helped them a lot this last year.
We are about to enter the cookie cutter portion of the podcast. Are you ready?
Sure.
Are there any strengths or concerns about this team that are flying under the radar that we haven't discussed yet?
Strengths? No. The concerns are probably the youth. Where Matt Moore of Action Network said to me yesterday, he's like, "Are you really this in on a team that might need to rely on rookies?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but it's better than if they had made the playoffs and not had either of these guys. Then it would have been real bleak. It would have been trying to get excited about Grant Williams, Luka Doncic, and Kyrie Irving, and that's it." So it's the youth of it all. I've talked about it some, but I'm more excited about it than others, I think.
As of right now, what would you think at full strength the 10-man rotation ends up looking like? I think I jotted down in the outline, I think there's probably 8 locks, it feels like, with 2 spots sort of up for grabs. There's Luka, Kyrie, THJ, Grant Williams, Dwight Powell, Josh Green, and Kleba, and Jaden Hardy would be my locks. I don't know if you agree with those 8.
I don't have Jaden Hardy as a lock, so I have Luka, Kyrie, Tim Hardaway, Grant Williams, Dwight Powell, Maxi Kleba, and then I'm gonna put Omax in there. I'm nuts. Okay. I really am. A secret deep sleeper is this guy that they signed to a 2-way named Mike Miles Jr. from TCU. He's another. He's a kid guy again, a guy willing to play his absolute ass off. That's just what the Mavericks have right now.
This is to some extent matchup dependent, but what do you think should be their most preferred closing 5 unit? Is it just the starting 5, or could you see some tinkering there?
No, I think if you start with Powell or if you start with Holmes, I think you have to end with Maxi Kleba. Kleba drives me crazy because he's so hit or miss. But if he's healthy, then he tore his hamstring last year and wasn't really right after that. If he can be healthy, he's sort of the stretch 5 that the team needs. And I think you can play him and Grant Williams together with Kyrie and Luka, and that's pretty smallish. But if you're to play, you have your options there as the 5th guy, anywhere from Tim Hardaway, Josh Green to even Omax or Dante Exum. I think they have real optionality there. But I would say Luka, Kyrie, Grant Williams, and Maxi Kleba would be my consistent lock for 4 of the 5 guys.
Is there a quirky, weirdo, unconventional lineup you would like to see them try this season? Even if
I'm not sure, because the whole lineup is weird. Where it's when your point guard's 6'5" and your shooting guard's 6'2" and your power forward is 6'5", there's just weirdness going on here. The whole thing is weird. I just don't know. I'm going to be curious to see if Derrick Jones actually gets any run. He's pretty interesting out of pick and roll. There's some odd options, but nothing really is jumping out at me at the moment.
I think I'd like to see them play what would be their version of super big, but not too big, where it's Luka, Grant Williams, who's not big. I want to make that clear. Maxi Kleba, and now I'm all in on Omax after you just said him. And then let's throw Dante Exum in there as another bigger guard or something, just to see what that looks like. But you're right. I guess the whole roster is kind of weird. And any lineup you put even that lineup, I'm like, that lineup kind of makes sense in some ways. It's not really weirdo, but that might just be relative to the state of the roster right now.
Yeah. No, it's an odd situation.
So their win total is currently set as we record this. It is September 20th at 44.5. Would you lean over or under on that? And how do you, which teams are you sure are better than them in the Western Conference right now?
Ooh, I'd probably go under just because I still got kind of the nasty taste of a 38 win season in my mouth. But when I look at the Western Conference, I'm very confident that Denver's better than them. I'm confident about Phoenix, Golden State. As much as it pains me, the Lakers, the Thunder, those are the main teams. I am not. Memphis can kiss my ass. The Mavericks play them 3 times in the first 25 games, and that's like when Ja's out, and I just think Dallas is going to annihilate them. The Kings are probably better too. I think I skipped them by accident. I don't believe in the Pelicans. I don't believe in the Timberwolves. There's certain teams where I'm just like total disdain for, but we'll see. It's a long season.
I think you have more. I know it's right now it's tough to do this, but I think you have more teams that I would guarantee are better than the Mavericks than I would, because I'm like kind of only in the Western Conference, Phoenix and Denver, where I'm just like those are the top of the West, and then you could almost tell me any order that doesn't involve the Rockets or the Spurs shooting into the playoffs, and I'd probably buy it.
The Warriors are just such a pain matchup for Dallas because the ideal perfect center to play with Luka Doncic is on their roster. He's the guy who's going to save American basketball next year, and Kevon Looney. He's going to be our guy in the United States playoffs. This is my bizarre take, but they're not a good matchup for the Mavericks. The Mavericks can run them off the floor sometimes because that's just how basketball goes, but that's just where my head is. I mean, the Clippers, I have also PTSD from the only two series that the Clippers have ever been any good at were the dang series where they beat the Mavericks both times.
Yeah, and that was one of those series. Was that the bubble? What was the teams where Kristaps was actually playing really well?
Yes, and it was I got this poster up on my board where it's like the double overtime game where Luka had like 45, 16, and 17. And then they lost the series because of course they did.
Is there anyone else we haven't discussed that you think we need to cover before we get out of here? You have any strong thoughts on Luka Doncic's offseason conditioning?
I'm pleased with his conditioning. He looked good in the World Cup, and for the first half of the World Cup, he managed to basically ignore the challenging referees and be a good sport, and then he got thrown out during the quarterfinals. And Luka is going to come in this year, and the narrative around him, fairly so, let me point out, is going to be 100% villain oriented. People are fucking sick of him. So
the complaining is, as a, I don't want to say impartial observer, I guess, but like from someone who's just 10,000 foot view and covers the entire league, it is very annoying to watch him complain over and over again.
No, it's awful.
Kirk, this was fun as always. I appreciate the time. Are you just able to tell our listeners where they can find you and all the great work that you do?
If you would like to find us for the website, I run MavsMoneyball.com. If you are interested in any podcast or video, there's a YouTube channel, Pod Maverick. And then the podcast is audio version only, Pod Maverick, on anywhere you can get your stuff. My co-host and I will basically do a recap after every game, and then I run like a late night lunatics lounge of sorts, depending on whether the Mavericks win or lose. That's just like me and you talking here on this app, where I am crazy enough to where I send out that link that you can have. I put it out there on social media, and people just come and join, and we talk about ball till 1, 2, 3 in the morning.
And fun. Those things I've seen some, I don't know that I've seen them live. I've seen some of those things are bears. So you guys do a great job generating fan engagement on that stuff. The links to all those things will be in our podcast and YouTube description for those listening. As always, Kirk, I really do appreciate the time. And as I'm sure you know by now, I'll be spamming your DMs again in the future.
Of course. Thanks for having me.